It is week 15 of the NFL season, which means there are just count them, 4 more weeks left of the regular season. The margin for error is razor thin. One loss, and it could be the end of your playoff hopes, as these last 4 weeks are going to be intense week by week. So without further ado, let's get to the week 15 NFL predictions. As always, we begin with TNF, and this week for TNF, 49ers and Seahawks. Now, I'm a bit unsure about this pick. I am going with the 49ers, but Brock Purdy was limited in practice on Monday with what's being reported with an oblique and ribs injury. Now, Mike White also is dealing with a ribs injury right now. And we saw Justin Herbert have a ribs injury in the second game of the year against the Chiefs on TNF, but he played the next week. Now, part of that is because he had a few more days to rest for that game in week 3 against Jacksonville, as Purdy does for this week. So if Purdy can't go, it's expected that Josh Johnson will be the starting quarterback for the 49ers. And I think if that is the case, I think the 49ers, they should be invested in the Wildcat. Just have McCaffrey line up in the Wildcat every play of the game. Because I'm still picking the 49ers, even with this injury concern to Purdy, because the 49ers, they have the better defense, they have the better running game, as McCaffrey had a dominant performance against an elite run defense against the Bucs last week. So I'm taking the Niners. Up next, the first of 3 Saturday games, the Colts and the Vikings. The Colts coming off of their bye week, while the Vikings, they're coming off of a very abysmal performance against the Lions despite a career high for Justin Jefferson last week. And he was dominant in man coverage against Detroit. And the Vikings, they've been disrespected all season long. And with the performance they had last week, I'm a bit surprised that Vegas isn't disrespecting them either. The Vikings right now are a 4-point favorite, and I really thought when I was looking at the lines this morning that it was going to be Vikings minus 2.5. I think that's just how much the Vikings have been disrespected throughout these last, several weeks. But with the win, the Vikings will clinch the NFC North, and I like that to happen. I think the Vikings, they win, they'll clinch the NFC North. I think Jefferson has another good game this week. Not a career game like he did last week, but I think he'll still do really well. Up next, we have the Ravens and the Browns. The Browns, in their 2 games with Deshaun Watson under center, have been absolutely abysmal. And part of that could be because they've been road games and the road fans have been very hostile towards Deshaun Watson, harassing him, yelling harassive chants towards him, yelling no means no, yelling you sick blank. But the Browns are back in the dog pound, where hopefully the harassment will be silenced for this week. If anything, limited, because there are visiting fans as well that show up to games. But Lamar Jackson is expected to miss another week. Tyler Huntley is in concussion protocol. So right now it's looking like the Ravens will be starting third-string quarterback Anthony Brown in this game, which I expect a very low-scoring game here. Believe it or not, I do. I think this is going to be a very heavily Nick Chubb reliant type of game. They're going to be relying on him heavily. The Ravens secondary, their defense in general, they have had some inconsistencies. They've blown leads all season long. But I think the Browns, they win in a low-scoring game. Up next, we have the Dolphins and the Bills. Now, it's being projected there's going to be 4 to 7 inches of snow for this game, which is very concerning. So I am going to make really a bold prediction here. Even though the Dolphins, they beat the Bills earlier in the year, it was a home game for them. And this is a cold weather game for the Dolphins. But I am picking the Dolphins to upset the Bills. The Bills' defense has not really impressed me in this last month and a half. Now, part of that is because of injuries. As if all the teams were fully healthy, the Bills would probably be first in line as far as Super Bowl favorites. And I haven't checked odds lately, but I would imagine the Bills are still Super Bowl favorites. And I'm going to go with the Dolphins to upset the Bills, mainly because the Bills' defense, they have not looked impressive to me, and their offense has been a little inconsistent. It's not the offense that we fully expected it to be with new offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey. But the Bills are going to be fine, but I just think the Dolphins, they win this week. I think Tua is going to silence the doubters. I think Tyreek Hill, despite him being questionable, him and Jalen Waddle are going to be mismatches for anybody. Up next, we have the Eagles and the Bears. The Bears coming off their bye week. The Bears, they're eliminated from playoff contention. So they're just playing for pride at this point and trying to sabotage an Eagles Super Bowl run. As the Eagles, they sit at 12-1, and Jalen Hurts is the leading contender for MVP. At least he's in my opinion. I know there are people that still back Patrick Mahomes, even though he has not looked good in the last 3 weeks. So I'm going with Philly to make it 13-1, setting up possibly an epic showdown between the Eagles and Cowboys in Jerry World on Christmas Eve next week. But that is if the Cowboys take care of business, which we'll talk about later, and if they don't, I feel like the hype for that matchup goes down just a little bit. Up next, we have the Falcons and the Saints. The Falcons are finally turning to Desmond Ridder at quarterback, which I honestly feel like it's about 6 to 8 weeks too late. They go on the road against the Saints. Now, both these teams, they're coming off the bye, which I will give Arthur Smith a little bit of benefit of the doubt, considering that at least it was revealed that he would be the starting quarterback going into the bye week, which I don't know if that's going to bode well in the Falcons' favor, which, it probably will, because all you have on Desmond Ridder is preseason tape at this point. And preseason, you're up against probably second, third, fourth stringers, fifth stringers. But I'm still picking the Saints. I think Alvin Kamara, despite his struggles these last few weeks, I think he's going to have a dominant performance in this game, as the Falcons' defense has been non-existent for years. And I say this a lot. I feel like a broken record at this point. But I'm going with the Saints. Up next, we got the Steelers and the Panthers. The Panthers picked up a really impressive win over the Seahawks last week. And Steve Wilkes, he is taking advantage of the second chance of being a coach. As remember, he was the coach for the Cardinals. I forgot what year it was off the top of my head, but he was fired after just 1 year. So the Panthers, they have looked really well. They look like a much better team since they fired Matt Rule. And I'm going to go with the Steelers in this game. Now, I know the Steelers struggled last week, but their defense is going to be the difference in this game for me. The Panthers' defense is fairly underrated, but I like the Steelers' defense a lot better in this matchup. Up next, we have the Cowboys and the Jaguars in what is my trap game of the week. Now, I told you last week that Cowboys-Jaguars is going to potentially be my trap game of the week. And we saw the Cowboys had to come from behind last week to beat the Texans. Well, the Jaguars, they are coming off of a dominant win against the Titans on the road. So, the reason why I think this is a trap game, we're all expecting the Cowboys to win. They're going to have a big performance this week. But the Cowboys have looked way too comfortable in these last few weeks. This is their first road game in nearly a month, as they've had their last 3 games at home. And the Jaguars, they are a scrappy team. No matter who the coach is, the Jaguars team is always scrappy. They're a team that if you don't take seriously, they're going to get you. And there's a few examples of that. They got the Bills last year. They got the Titans this past week. They got the Chargers in week 3. Now, granted, Justin Herbert did have the ribs injury, but still, if he was fully healthy, the Jaguars were dominant in that game. It almost happened to the Packers a few years ago, one of Aaron Rodgers' MVP seasons. So there's just countless examples of teams taking the Jaguars lightly, and they get you. And I think it happens again. I think the Jaguars pull off the upset against the Cowboys. Plus the Cowboys, they're potentially maybe looking ahead towards that Christmas Eve matchup against the Eagles. And I think they lose focus, and the Jaguars, they get them. Just like the Jaguars have gotten teams countless times. Up next are the Chiefs and Texans. Now, Patrick Mahomes has not looked good these last 3 weeks. He threw 3 interceptions last week, and the Chiefs almost blew that game against the Broncos. While the Texans, even though they only have 1 win this season, they played the Cowboys pretty close. They played the Browns fairly close the week prior to that, and if it weren't for the Browns' defense and special teams, the Texans probably win that game. So the Texans, they have had a pretty fairly good effort these last couple of weeks, but they're going up against a Chiefs team that really needs to get recharged by the time the playoffs roll around. Because if the Dolphins, if they happen to beat the Bills, and the Chiefs beat the Texans, and the Chiefs, they are going to be back in first place in the AFC. And the number 1 seed in the playoffs these last couple of years, it's been more important than ever, as the 1 seed is the only seed that gets the first round bye. So I'm taking Kansas City. And again, the bigger concern is, will they cover that 14-point spread? Up next, we have the Cardinals and the Broncos in the game of where I unfortunately have to pick somebody to win this game, as this is going to be a disaster of a game to pick. And if I was somebody that were to bet on games, if I'm one of those professional sports gamblers, which I am not, now this isn't gambling advice, but avoid this game at all costs, because this game is going to be very likely to be awful. Colt McCoy versus Brett Rippon, as Russell Wilson is expected to miss this week. His status is in doubt for this game. So this is basically just me thinking who's going to be the better quarterback of the backups. And I'm honestly leaning towards the Cardinals, even though the Broncos, they have the better defense and they're going to have the home field advantage being in the altitude. I don't know why. This is just a game where I am fortunate to pick somebody. Just please don't bet on this game unless you're like absolutely confident that you know the way this game's going. Please don't bet on it, because this is going to be a very terrible game. And I'll be surprised if either of these teams score more than 20 points. And scratch that. I'll be surprised if either of these teams scores 14 points. Up next are the Patriots and the Raiders. The Raiders, they're coming off of a heartbreaking loss to the Rams on Thursday Night Football. Baker Mayfield led a 98-yard drive to upset the Raiders and crush their hearts. Well, the Patriots, a dominant win over the Cardinals on Monday Night Football, which we unfortunately saw Kyler Murray's season come to an end with a non-contact injury. And Ramondre Stevenson also left the game. Devontae Parker also left that game. Injuries were just piling up on both sides in that game. Now the Patriots, they're doing the smart thing. They're doing what the Bills should have done when they were playing the Browns in Detroit. And that is stay out west. Don't go home. Now, honestly, granted, that just happened to be the week of Thanksgiving when the Bills went home and then went back to Detroit, which I think was a big reason why they didn't cover. But I'm going with the Patriots. And the Patriots, they will keep their playoff hopes alive. Up next, we have the Titans and the Rams. Titans, absolutely obliterated by the Jaguars, which honestly isn't surprising, as the Titans, they have one of the worst pass defenses in the entire league. And now that Keenan Allen is fully healthy and confident, Mike Williams fully healthy and confident, I expect Justin Herbert to have about 350 yards on this Titans defense. As their pass defense isn't that great, but their run defense is fairly underrated and not really talked about. But I'm still picking the Chargers, as they had a big confidence booster against the Dolphins last week. And I think that momentum continues into this week. Up next, we have the Bengals and the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, they looked really abysmal last week against San Francisco. Now, I know that this wasn't the difference in the game, but the Buccaneers had an early chance to get some momentum in that game. A long touchdown pass to Mike Evans got called back for holding penalty on Donovan Smith. Which, I get that the Buccaneers, they are thin at offensive line. But why is he even in the game? Because I believe the week prior to that, he had like 4 holding calls on him against the Saints. They had another couple against the Browns. Like, what is this? Like 7 holding penalties on Donovan Smith in the last 3 weeks? Yeah, something needs to be addressed with Donovan Smith and the offensive line coach. But I'm going to go with the Buccaneers to pull out this upset, and the reason why I am is because there's just too many question marks for the Buccaneers right now. I mean, T. Higgins only played 1 game last week, then left with a hamstring injury, which honestly, the Bengals need to get fined for that. They need to get fined for what they did in that game. And Tyler Boyd's status is in question. So if Jamar Chase is getting double covered, plus Hayden Hurst might be out once again this week, yeah, I think that the Buccaneers defense, I think they'll be able to stay in it against this Bengals offense. I think as long as the defense shows up for Tampa Bay and make this a game, all you gotta do is give Tom a chance, and I think the Buccaneers win on, once again, a last-minute drive. Vintage Tom Brady, as we've seen a couple times this season. Sunday Night Football, the Giants and the Commanders. Now, we saw these two teams tie a couple weeks ago, and I don't know why they had to flex this game for Sunday night out of all games. I would have much rather them flexed in the Lions and the Jets. So I don't know why they didn't do that. And I'm not sure if I picked the Lions and the Jets earlier on. I don't know if I skipped over it, but just in case, I do like the Lions to beat the Jets, despite Mike White's ribs injury concern. The Lions, they've been playing well, and despite their defense not being up to par this season, they've held their own. They've bended, but they haven't broken that much. So I like the Lions. Just want to make sure I address that. Anyway, I'm picking the Commanders over the Giants. Their season, I think, is done, as they are just starting to implode at the seams. And finally, Monday Night Football, the Rams and the Packers. Now, we saw Baker Mayfield lead a 98-yard drive last week in the last minute against the Raiders on TNF. Now, the Rams, you may think they could have an edge because they played Thursday night. Wrong. The Packers have more of an advantage as they're coming off their bye week. So these are going to be 2 well-rested teams, and hopefully we see a very nice plethora of points in this game, as it's typical for primetime games that they don't have a lot of points scored in. But I'm going with the Packers, as I expect Aaron Rodgers to play in this game, as there were some rumors that they could turn it over to Jordan Love. But with the Packers still having playoff hopes, I still think we're going to see a nice vintage Aaron Rodgers game. And that will do it for my Week 15 NFL predictions. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a good day and enjoy the NFL this weekend.